Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening, Dr. Hemant Thakkar sir, and our next faculty, our Senior Vice President from Delhi branch, Dr. Rajiv Kumar Jain. May I request our President, Dr. Gajendra Kumar sir, to give the welcome address.
Good evening, friends. Today we are again meeting for this webinar, our 52nd edition, which we are holding more than now a year. And as all of you are aware that we are passing through a very, very difficult time. And in this difficult time, we could able to interact through this web series. Uh, Today we have got very eminent speakers with us, Dr. Hemant Thakkar from Breach Candy Hospital, Mumbai, and Dr. Rajiv Kumar Jain, our Vice President. Dr. Thakkar shall be speaking on prevent the preventable. I think this can be considered as the most apt topic for the day. And thereafter, Dr. Jain shall be discussing about the COVID situation in the country. So I welcome both the speakers. I welcome all the participants. And with these few words, I now hand over to Dr. Sandeep to proceed further. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gajendra Kumar sir. So once again, welcome you all to the 52nd edition of this Enoch DigiConnect webinar during this COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you all for joining us today. And this Enoch webinar are held every Saturday evening at 6:30 p.m. This Enoch, that is Environmental and Occupational Health, is an ambitious cross-sectoral endeavor that aims to lay out the roadmap for industrial physicians in India to achieve universal health coverage for the workforce of India. We aim to do this with your active engagement, thoughts and suggestions, both about the topic that we shall be discussing today with our learned faculty, but also the topics for the future webinars. This Enoch webinars series is intended to serve as a platform for public discourse in India and engage a wide community, academics, clinical practitioners, industrial physicians, occupational physicians, and the issues which are related to the workplace health. This is critically important that timely discussion of on the priority actions to deal with devastating pandemic surge and humanitarian crisis response in India. So here this evening, sir, we look at the way forward to focus on the short and the long-term actions that are needed. What are the lessons that need to be learned and next steps that need to be taken to best suppress the epidemic in India. So thank you all for your participation in this webinar. So this 52nd issue, our first guest faculty is Dr. Hemant Thakkar. Dr. Hemant Thakkar is a very learned faculty. He is consulting physician, cardio-metabolic specialist from Breach Candy Hospital Trust, Mumbai, and he is also the COVID task force member from Maharashtra. Our second learned faculty is Dr. Rajiv Kumar Jain. He is senior vice president from Delhi branch of IEOH. For your information, sir, Dr. Hemant Thakkar, sir, IEOH is a leading professional body in India, and we are a group of about 3,000 industrial and doctors and occupational physicians, and we all during this whole pandemic for last one and a half year, we had been meeting regularly to update ourselves so that we can take care of our workforce and we can drive strategies for control of the pandemic in our respective organizations. So we are quite happy to have you, sir. And for information to all the participants, may I just give a short introduction of Dr. Hemant Thakkar, who is a learned faculty and he is an eminent physician practicing in Mumbai. He is the core group member of the COVID Task Force Maharashtra. After obtaining the MBBS degree from Seth GS Medical College in 1978, Dr. Thakkar did his MD in Medicine and Therapeutics from KEM Hospital in 1982. Dr. Thakkar has a wealth of experience, having worked as a consultant physician and cardio metabolic specialist at some of the most prestigious hospitals in Mumbai, such as KEM Hospital, Jaslok Hospital, Beach Candy Hospital, Bhatia, and Saifi Hospital. He has won numerous awards, and he is fellow of American College of Clinical Endocrinology, awarded the Vasant Pansalkar Scholarship and Gold Medal in Pharmacology for standing first in the pharmacology and first for the best intern. And he has published several papers. And moreover, since he has been an active member of the COVID task force in Maharashtra, so we would like to learn a lot from you, sir. And today's topic is also very apt: prevent the preventable. And in this regard, sir, may I request you to share your screen and you can start your deliberation, sir.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Sharma, for the kind introduction. Actually, the most important part of my CV, which I would like to declare, is not all the other awards and everything, but that I've grown up under the shadow of IAOH. My father, Dr. P.V. Thakkar from Tatas, was the founding member of IAOH, and I have heard the name IAOH and I have seen all his books at home. So that is what gives me the best credential on my CV and nothing else. So I'm quite familiar with IAOH. I see Dr. Rajgopal, who is also one of the founding fathers, and I'm happy to be associated with you. And today I'm going to talk on, as you said, COVID, influenza, and I'm going to call it preventable diseases because I sincerely believe that all these both of them are significantly and adequately preventable. And before we say how it is preventable, let's look at a few slides and then discuss from that point of view. Uh, is my screen visible now? The slides that I am sharing. Can everybody see my slides, please?
Yes, sir.
Right. So we're going to talk of influenza and COVID-19. Now we know influenza by definition, our most intimate enemy. This is actually an antithesis. Enemies are never intimate, but it's still an intimate enemy. And you can see how one can get up, sleep, and be struck by influenza. It's an acute, febrile, highly contagious respiratory infection characterized by sudden onset of fever and myalgia, which can result in hospitalizations and, unfortunately, even death. Every year, influenza is responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths worldwide. And it has been estimated that influenza causes anything from 290,000 to 650,000 respiratory deaths annually worldwide. The annual attack rate is high for children, almost 25%. Approximately 4 people die from influenza every 5 minutes around the world. A horrifying statement. And the worldwide influenza results in 3 to 5 million cases of severe illness. We read so much about COVID, but COVID, more than COVID, is influenza, a silent trigger with far reaching effects. Now, if you look at the seasonal influenza cases and deaths, 2010 to 2021, almost a decade, the total cases reported of confirmed influenza, 162,000 odd, and total deaths reported, 11,000 plus. Now, deaths were triggered by flu, but not recorded as flu deaths are below the tip of the iceberg. Because what you have calculated is only the tip of the iceberg. And flu deaths not seen by medical service is another big spike much below the tip of the iceberg. So what you are seeing is probably only one third. The remaining is much higher, but is unseen, unrecorded. So Fluenza is underreported, under-recognized, and only 28% of hospitalizations and 17% outpatient visits by children with laboratory-confirmed influenza had a discharge diagnosis of influenza. We all know that influenza can lead to excessive use of antibiotics as other viral infections like COVID and common bacterial co-infections or secondary infections following influenza are Streptococcus pneumoniae, Haemophilus influenzae, and Staphylococcus aureus. And this results in antimicrobial resistance because lavishly used antibiotics during influenza allows growth of resistant bacteria. If you look at the economic burden of influenza, in every country, health comes first, only after economy. Economy superrides everything. So if you look at the economic burden, the microeconomic costs and the macroeconomic costs, the cost related to the disease itself is the OTC drugs, lab tests, imaging, doctor's visits, ER visits, hospitalizations in wards and in ICUs. This results in years' life loss, absenteeism, and that finally leads to loss of productivity. The macroeconomic cost is GDP losses, and it disrupts the healthcare system. Our healthcare system, mind you, is very good. And the healthcare system of people around other countries in the world is also good. But healthcare is built for 1 to 2% of the population falling ill at any time, not at simultaneous time when you have more than 3% of the population or more than 5% of the population struck, like we are unfortunately facing or which we faced last fortnight. And why did we face this last fortnight is because of SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19. Can you believe it? कहते कहते COVID-19 ने 2020 को भी निकाल दिया and we are halfway through 2021. So COVID-19 seems 2 years ago, but COVID-19 is still fanning the fire. It's the third coronavirus to emerge in the human population in the past 2 decades, an emergence that has put the global public health institutions on high alert. We all know how it was born in Wuhan. First case reported 1st December. First cases may have even occurred around December 8th, 2019. And first suspected case termed novel coronavirus or COVID-2 were notified to WHO on the last day of 2019. On January 12th, 2020, Chinese health authorities posted the full genome of 2019 novel coronavirus. It took about 4 to 6 months for SARS-CoV-1 and MERS-CoV to be genomed, but this was quickly posted on by the Chinese. You can read between the lines what I am saying. Cases have been detected in most countries worldwide, and community spread is being detected in a growing number of countries. On March 11th, the WHO described it as a pandemic. This is the first pandemic known to be caused by the emergence of a new coronavirus. In the past century, there have been 4 pandemics caused by the emergence of novel influenza viruses. As a result of this, most research and guidance around pandemics is specific to influenza. But the same premises can be applied to SARS-CoV-2. If you look at the corona classification, corona means crowned, named by the crown-like spikes on their surface. 4 main subgroupings of coronaviruses, alpha, beta, gamma, and delta, and coronaviruses that are usually described to infect humans are found in both the alpha and the beta genus. It's an enveloped positive RNA virus The virus particle has a diameter of 60 to 100 nanomicrometers, and the spike protein is the antigen targeted by the neutralizing antibody. If you look at the classification and the intermediate host with the first cases and the disease, you have the first one, which is coded HKU11 as the end. The second one was MERS-3, which is a beta virus, first reported in Saudi Arabia with the dromedary camel, and it caused the Middle East respiratory syndrome. Fortunately, at that time, it was restricted, controlled, and it didn't spread other places in the world. SARS-CoV-2 and SARS-CoV-1 are the next two. SARS-CoV was a beta virus, again reported in China in November 2002. It caused SARS, an atypical pneumonia. Again, it was restricted and controlled, but SARS-CoV-2, which is also a beta virus, caused by probably an intermediate animal host, pangolin, which has devastated the whole world today. And the ecology of emerging coronaviruses are all of bat origin, which cause human infections after circulation in animal hosts. The diagram here says it all: natural host, circulation in intermediate host, and then the human transmission. The emergence of SARS-CoV-2 and the outbreak of COVID-19, the hypothesis on the virus source and generalized route of transmission of the epidemic zoonotic coronavirus SARS-CoV-2. You can see cross species transmission. You can see after the cross species transmission, you have the intermediate host. Then you have a zoonotic transmission, community contact, which finally goes to mass gatherings, mobility, and then when it comes to hospitals, there is nosocomial contraction and transmission, healthcare workers, and other patients. So if you compare between flu, COVID-19, SARS, and MERS, you can see the incubation time for COVID-19 is probably the longest. True, MERS also had a long one, but it's a pretty long transmission incubation period. Hospitalization rate for flu is only 20%, is only 2% in flu, but 20 to 30% with COVID-19 and SARS and MERS, most cases. The global infection rate, see influenza, 1 billion cases every year. COVID-19 is still 141 million and counting. Of course, SARS and MERS, one doesn't want to talk because they have been controlled. If you compare it with other contagious diseases, measles, chickenpox, polio, smallpox, other things, you can see that identification of cases early in the disease and intensification of viral control methods and deployment of treatments should drive down the reproduction number and the residual case fatalities. And if you see, influenza is right there, 1957. Now, if you look at COVID-19, transmission, we know, respiratory droplets or by contact with contaminated objects and surfaces. Though this objects and contact transmission is gradually losing out, it is mainly the respiratory droplets, aerosol transmission, and the diagnosis RT-PCR. There is, of course, a fallacy if RT-PCR, where you can get a false negative sample if it is improperly collected, or there is a low viral amount in the upper respiratory tract. And even in symptomatic cases, you can get a false negative. It can be also positive in asymptomatic case contacts, which is why in February 13, China added chest radiography. But we have seen CT scores and CT scanning, quick HRCT, high resolution, resolves the problem. Now, does it have a same attack rate in all age groups? What we thought last year is different from what we know now. And we hope that there is no third wave for us to change age groups. But we know children are getting affected. We know that this second wave hit the younger group from 18 plus up to 40. And we knew in the beginning it was the adult and the geriatric age group. If you look at the incubation period, we have discussed mild cases usually last 2 weeks, after which we say they are through. Severe or critical cases, anything from 3 to 6 weeks. Those symptoms may not start in the beginning. The symptomatology at 6th, 7th, 8th, if you ask me, the symptomatology at 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th day, end of the first week to end of the second week is the most important period, 7 to 12 days. In that period, it is extremely contagious, and anything from direct contact to surfaces to air droplets, of course, is the contagious period. And this is when the cytokine storm can happen. Most of our patients contract it on day one, hang around in the house for a couple of days. Day three, test positive. On day 5 and 6, they pace and post on Facebook, "There's nothing wrong with me. I was positive. Today is the 6th day. I am enjoying a game of cards at home." And on the 7th day, the breathlessness starts. On the 8th day, the saturation drops. And that's when he needs to come to hospital. So the hand of cards or the cheers should not be before the 14th day. This is important to understand. And all this can snowball up to 6 weeks. We know that 85% will be asymptomatic, so unknown. Most other remaining patients experience a mild to moderate illness with fever, myalgia, cough, fatigue, some intestinal symptoms, and of course, loss of taste and smell, which we see in a lot of viral infections. Now, it is the multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children which is currently rocking the COVID world. So, pediatric inflammatory multisystem syndrome, also known as MIS-C, which can lead to serious illness and long-term side effects. The clinical and laboratory features are similar to Kawasaki's disease, but it is different from Kawasaki's disease because of age of onset, higher proportion of African or Hispanic children, and diffuse cardiovascular involvement, suggestive of a generalized immune-mediated disease. People with pre-existing conditions, they are soft targets, easy targets, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, COPD, hypertension, cancer. The death rate is very high because of, you can see the confirmed cases and all cases. Again, the virus loves males. Females are half as much as males as far as infliction and death rate, which is why a lot of European countries, to limit the spread, began self isolation, then social distancing, banning public events, closing schools, and finally, lockdown. It is the rise in the proportion of younger adults amongst COVID 19 cases which is really rocking the world. And the spikes in cases in some countries are being driven because the younger people let down their guards, especially during the Northern Hemisphere summer, where summertime, for a lot of you who know Europe and the West, you know that from June, July, and August up until September, till fall starts, everybody is footloose and fancy free. As far as I'm concerned, not fancy free alone, but mask free also. This is why US, Germany, and the others had a very high spike during their social contact increase. And if you look at the seroprevalence data and the immune responses, particularly in those with mild or asymptomatic disease, remember the T cell responses to COVID and their potential to provide long term protection from reinfections remains debated. And T cell responses may be higher than IG serological responses amongst mild COVID-19, asymptomatic, or exposure to infected family members. So, therefore, the need for vaccination in seroprevalence patients is extremely important. Having said that, that vaccination is the crux. See here that there is a poor T cell response. So let's talk about vaccination, whether it is flu with more than 1 billion cases a year or COVID 19, who knows for how long. Remember, there are numerous overlaps in the risk factors for both of them. Common complications following COVID and influenza. And both these are seasonal, with influenza presenting with overlapping symptoms. And influenza and COVID 19 can also coexist. Remember, viruses have no borders. In influenza, it is advanced age and very young children, morbid obesity, all underlying comorbidities, and residents in nursing homes. A similar predilection with COVID 19, male sex predominating. This is the at risk population. And if you look at the common complications, they're again pretty similar. ARDS, cardiac injury, multiple organ failure, worsening of chronic medical conditions, COVID 19, a similar picture. I recently had to admit a very senior colleague of mine in the hospital who came in with cough, cold, and fever, and we diagnosed it query COVID. COVID, everything negative, CT scan negative. But a man with no history had got an ejection fraction of 40%, and they diagnosed Klebsiella pneumoniae. Everybody started him on anti-Klebsiella pneumoniae treatment. But when I was called in, I said, no, you have to start with either Tamiflu or Remdesivir, because Klebsiella doesn't cause myocarditis. True enough, he responded to Remdesivir, and within 7 days, his echo, which was 40%, is now back to 60%. So remember, cardiac injury is common. Then, of course, in COVID-19, there is a list of pulmonary embolism, inflammatory syndrome, blood clots, MISC, and of course, higher ICU admission with oxygen requirements. So when diagnosing SARS-CoV-2 subjects, the possibility of co-infection should be considered. Influenza A and B together were the most prevalent viruses co-infected with another respiratory virus. So you have to draw your conclusions. This is the proportion of viral co-infections, which you can see all the way down to CMV with respiratory viruses. 3% of patients hospitalized with COVID-19 were seen to be co-infected with other viruses. So if you look at these scenarios for COVID-19 timing and influenza, the influenza season, the first wave, and if you can see the unlikely probability of remaining waves, the flu season was November to April all the time. Scenario 2, you can have second waves. And if you have second waves, you will see very likely possibility. And the third is a recurrent where it comes and goes, comes and goes. Now look at the gray worm and look at the red worm. The flu season is the red worm. So waves not necessarily here represent magnitude, but in many countries, an increase of COVID-19 is being observed following the lift of lockdowns and relaxation of measures. And the overlap of these two causes epidemics at the same time and places a great pressure on the healthcare system. So therefore, the importance of vaccinating. Vaccination amidst COVID-19 pandemic. The World Health Organization, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, CDC have all said very clearly that seasonal influenza vaccination recommendations during COVID-19 is extremely important, with the highest priority for healthcare workers and older adults. What you have and what you know and what you can prevent should be implemented aggressively in the high risk groups. Even CDC says getting a flu vaccine is more important than ever during 2020-2021 to protect yourself, your family, and your community from flu. Remember, today, if you get cough, cold, and fever, you're going to become an achut or a paria because everybody will say you have had COVID. But if you have this because of influenza, you can prevent it if you take your influenza vaccine. And if you look at the co-administration of vaccine, the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare has recommended that COVID-19 and other vaccines can be given, but they should be separated by an interval of at least 14 days. Today, the government has separated the duration between first and second dose of Covishield. So you have enough time between the two. You have also time if you want to take after the first dose, 14 days go by and take the influenza vaccine and then take the second dose of Covaxin. But vaccinate you must. If you look at the European Commission, American Heart Association, American College of Cardiology, they all say that this places such a considerable strain on health systems. Forget the health systems. You're denying a cardiac patient of the opportunity to minimize his problems because influenza will hurt him, secondary bacterial infection will wound him, and all this put together, hospitalization, can make him succumb his life, all for the want of a simple vaccine. As they saw and as they read and as we are taught, a kingdom can be lost all for the want of a horseshoe nail. So CDC, I am quoting, getting a flu vaccine is extremely important. Get a flu shot, do your part. This vaccine you must get before the fall. In countries of regions with low influenza incidence, a single dose will be protective even against COVID-19 severity. Now, this is a very important statement. We all know that there are rare cases with all the mutants and double mutants where two vaccines also sometimes are not enough. So, if you can get a flu vaccine, you can even modulate and downgrade the infection of 19 severity. So, influenza vaccination thus plays an extremely important role in protecting the elderly, the vulnerable, because it will protect against flu and it will moderate against COVID 19 and will facilitate differential diagnosis and avoid an overload on the family, the community, healthcare services, etc. Again, in the action and in the absence of RCT data, strong and consistent observational evidence and or biological mechanisms, we should assume that influenza vaccination does not affect COVID-19 risk or severity, and we cannot communicate that influenza vaccines are beneficial. But as a practicing physician, I can definitely say that if you have been vaccinated for influenza, the severity of your COVID-19 symptoms will definitely be downgraded. I've had consultants who've taken 2 shots of COVID vaccine. When they again become COVID positive, which is not very common, their level of severity is mild and can be downgraded. So same would happen if you had given him influenza vaccine. The co-circulation of COVID-19 and influenza can worsen the impact on healthcare that is already overwhelmed. This is what the Director General of WHO says. During the COVID-19 pandemic, it is essential to vaccinate all people in high risk with influenza vaccine. And this will help the individual and the community. It will reduce the spread of influenza in the community and also minimize patients' exposure to COVID-19 in waiting rooms or exposure of others to influenza. So to reduce the burden on healthcare system, preventing influenza is an extremely important motive. Seasonal influenza and vaccination timings. We all know that influenza is seasonal. They all say it's flu season now, come and get your shot. So let's quickly take a look at that. You know, geographically, we are 23 degrees north. We are in the northern hemisphere. And influenza activity peaks from November to March in the northern hemisphere. But we are in the tropics. So year-round activity continues in the tropics. And in the southern hemisphere, influenza activity peak is from April to September. India, as far as the classification of vaccine is concerned, should use and uses now a southern hemisphere vaccine. WHO has said India falls in the tropical Asia zone, and when to vaccinate in the tropics and subtropics, it is from the April to August or April to September, because these practical recommendations were made specific for tropics and subtropics. So Southern Hemisphere vaccine is the vaccine for India based on influenza vaccination zone and vaccination timings. Our time started on April Fool Day, and it will go on all the way to end of August, September. So we should vaccinate. We should have vaccinated yesterday. If you look here, the different zones, I'm in Mumbai, Pune, July to September. So somewhere down the line, we should begin. Go down south, it goes to May and July. So the peak influenza activity, the proposed vaccination time, April to May, and then other places, September, October. So majority of states across India have peak influenza activity during southern hemisphere, and thus the southern hemisphere vaccine is ideal, except for few states like Jammu and Kashmir, and surprisingly Kerala and Tamil Nadu, which do not take the SH vaccine. So why is appropriate timing becoming important? Appropriate timing of vaccination is very important because the efforts to improve vaccine effectivity as titers wane over a period of time is important. So it is best to vaccinate closer to the season. We all know that if you are vulnerable from April onwards, and if you vaccinate early, the titers remain high all through the season. And then it drops till you come to the next season. I'm sure the same will happen or could happen for SARS-CoV-2, and we all may need booster shots. Only time will tell. So remember, vaccines do not save lives if they sit in the refrigerator or they are in a truck. Vaccinations do. So the time to vaccinate, the time to think of prevention. I know that IAOH is a body that believes in a lot of preventive medicine, and therefore I thought this was the right platform to address. I'm sorry I've exceeded my time limit. I was given 30 minutes, but I have over exceeded. I hope I have done something to enlighten the cause of vaccination. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thakkar, sir. Lot of points have been clarified by you in addition to what we were learning for last 1.5 year, especially uh, which vaccine is ideal for us in India, being a tropical country. That was a very important point. Southern hemisphere vaccine is ideal in India, except for Jammu Kashmir, Tamil Nadu, and Kerala. Uh, that is a very important point. And another point, sir, I wanted to highlight is Indian Association of Occupational Health. We have also released guidelines for our workplace immunization, flu immunization for our workforce. So we are going as per those guidelines. And Dr. Rajgopal he is very much there, and he can throw some light on these guidelines which were issued with under his guidance. And uh, yes, so we are happy to know. I was not at least aware that you are in close association with IAOH, and being the national secretary for IOH, it's my pleasure to be in touch with you, sir. And we would definitely like to take more of your guidance in coming days regarding this managing this COVID-19 pandemic. And may I request our panelists to unmute themselves if they have any questions
I
from
have got one question, Dr.
yeah, Dr. Gajendra Kumar, sir.
First of all, I compliment Dr. Hemant for a wonderful presentation on the subject. Now my question is, last year I had this influenza vaccine in the month of October. I am in Delhi, but somehow we were busy. All other since doctors normally delay everything as far as when their own health is concerned. So I had in the October. So will it be appropriate for me to go again for the vaccination in the month of October, or can I take it early?
You're talking about the influenza vaccine.
Influenza vaccine.
No,
Influenza.
take it now because Delhi forms into the southern hemisphere April to now. So you can take it June, July, and it will help you because it moves a little north when you move to Delhi, but still you should take it now, June, July.
Right.
So there is one more query, like what we were vaccinating our workforce, that vaccine was in quite shortage. So earlier quadrivalent vaccine was available. Then they said quadrivalent is not available. You can take trivalent. That batch is available right now. So what do you suggest, sir? Which one one should take?
Fortunately, influenza vaccine is in a much better position than COVID-19 vaccine. And I have been using the quadri vaccine of Sanofi, which is very good.
Yeah.
And we've seen very good preventive results. If that is not available, we'll have to write to Sanofi why they have not made it available. Because they had, I know last when we had ordered it for our hospitals, healthcare workers, and vulnerable patients, it was available in plenty. So I think it should be available.
Anyway, this was about 5-6 months back when flu vaccine was quite in demand.
Quadri, yes.
Quadri vaccine. So, anyway, sir, any other panelists? Dr. Rajiv Kumar Jain, sir?
Yes, Dr. Thakkar, I must compliment you once again. You have shown perfect erudition and comprehensive scientific discourse on COVID and influenza. It's very important, actually. But the question that comes in my mind is, if I had to scale up influenza vaccination, presently, unfortunately, it's privately funded. It's not publicly funded. For that matter, no adult vaccination is publicly funded. So don't you feel that this is the best time to push a larger agenda of adult vaccination? And if we say adult vaccination, my intention is to focus on geriatric vaccination first, and then working age population second. And then, of course, you cannot neglect that pediatric population, which has always been receiving, I feel, disproportionately larger attention and public funding. So what's your take on this issue?
You're absolutely right. The term vaccination connotates in people's mind that it is meant for children or for infants, that vaccination is for the young. This concept that adult vaccination is so important is something which we've been trying to push, whether it is hepatitis, herpes, pneumonia, influenza, all these adult vaccinations we've been trying to push. So we are sitting in an industrial body, and I think I would be happy because I do pen a few articles in the press, and I would be happy on behalf of IAOH, if you had some suggestions, to pen a piece that adults are as important. So what if they have white hair? And so what if their productivity has gone down? But they are important, and saving lives, salvaging years, looking at how we can reduce healthcare burden is very important. Every industry maybe a portion, a fragment of CSR can go into corporate social responsibility of adult vaccination. We should, we must, and we can take it when our managing directors and others come to us for advice. Let us twist their arms a little bit to give something for adult vaccination.
Thank you, Dr. Thakur.
So Sandeep,
Yeah, Dr. Rajgopal.
yeah,
sir.
just have a quick word with Hemant. Hemant, first of all, thanks for your time in coming and addressing all of us. I know this is a very busy period for you with so many admissions under you everywhere in Mumbai. And I do have the privilege of probably bumping into you daily as a part of my routine hospital visits. But I just have one question to ask. We have all been masking ourselves for the past 2 years, and the influenza has also gone down as an undesirable or desirable side effect. So, what is the WHO planning to do when they release the next influenza viral strain? Where are they going to get the new ones for 2022, if I'm asked? So, because that fascinates me. How is that going to come out?
So for all the panelists, I don't know if you know, but we have now have the pleasure of having Dr. Rajgopal's expertise at Breach Candy Hospital, and I'm proud to say that he comes and helps out with Breach Candy Hospital management. So we're very happy. We interact together. I agree, masks have filtered not only COVID, but so many other things which were undesirable. So where will WHO make the next vaccine from? WHO will look at aerosol strains because they usually aerosolize strains and identification of the genome from people with confirmed influenza by swabbing them. So I'm sure they will get into that, but they will definitely find it more difficult because we have masked it. In fact, I was a little surprised. I was talking on CNN the other day, and I even was a little critical of Joe Biden in America. How can you unmask yourself? I would still say it is too premature. Tomorrow, if India, I open my eyes and like a midsummer's night dream, if everybody is inoculated, I will still say wear your masks till Diwali. Don't take it lightly. This second surge and second wave has really crippled us, taken away young lives, and we are just licking our wounds. So I think masking is important. WHO will probably add 1 or 2 strains, and let's hope we get the best vaccine. So I think I have gouged away a lot of time with everybody's permission. I take your leave. I do have a few other things to follow up on my hospital patients. It was indeed a pleasure. My father is not alive today, but he would have been happy to know that I somewhere in his shadow did something for IAOH, and I'm always available for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Hemant, sir. Now, may I request Dr. Rajiv Kumar Jain sir to present the weekly COVID rapid updates so that we come across a broad overview of the situation which has visually improved in India. Although the numbers are decreasing, but should we become optimistic of uh, of now we are over with second wave, or still we need to be very careful?
Well, good evening, friends. So once again, on a Saturday evening, we collect, besides having a focused discussion on influenza and COVID-19, we cannot forget that there is a war going on the front of COVID-19, and it is a war which is long, tiring, but you cannot afford to lower your guard. So the only science which helps you to understand the science of COVID-19 spread in your region, in your state, in your country, in your region or continent, or in the world is the science of epidemiology. And if we understand that COVID-19 is an occupational disease, we should try to understand how the epidemiology is evolving in the context of COVID-19. So once again, we will start with the global situation in the world regions of the World Health Organization. This is the situation today. Now, on the left, I've shown you the column with newly reported cases in the last 7 days. And the second column is newly reported cases last 24 hours. In the regions of World Health Organization, as you know, World Health Organization has 6 regions in the world: the Western Pacific, Africa, Eastern Mediterranean, Southeast Asia, Europe, and Americas. Now, if you look at the numbers, it is no doubt for the last week, last 7 days, it was Southeast Asia region which contributed the maximum number to the world. 21, if you see 21,33,385 cases substantially contributed by India. And Americas contributed 12,30,000 and Europe contributed 5,79,000. Eastern Mediterranean has started becoming important. It contributed 1,99,000 in 7 days and 1,28,000 by Western Pacific region. Africa has just started contributing 42,000 cases. Now, if you look at this scenario, out of 43 lakh cases reported, more than half the cases are being reported by Southeast Asia region, and about a third of cases are from the Americas as a region. Next slide, please. Now we see, look at the countries. We have reported in the last 24 hours the highest number of cases, that is 2,59,551, while Brazil at number 2 position in the world has contributed 79,000. Argentina has contributed 39,000. United States has contributed 29,000. Colombia contributed 16,000. Iran, Islamic Republic, as I told you last week, it has gone up the ladder, 12,428 cases. Turkey, 9,385 cases. Russian Federation, 8,937 cases. Germany, 8,769 cases. And a new entrant, Nepal. Nepal contributed 8,227 cases in the last 24 hours. Please remember, you have to understand where these countries are. It is important. There are new countries entering in the top 8 countries in the world, top 10 countries in the world. New countries enter every week. This you must have seen if you're following every week, how things are changing. So you have to understand this pandemic continues to remain a pandemic. That's the most important observation. Next slide, please. If you look at the number of deaths in the last 24 hours, out of 12,000 deaths reported in the world, 12,786 deaths, India contributed 4,209 deaths, which is more than 1/3 of deaths in the world. Brazil contributed 2,641. United States contributed 629 deaths. Argentina, 494 deaths. Colombia, 452 deaths. Russian Federation, 378 deaths. Peru, 264 deaths. Iran, 229 deaths. Germany, 226 deaths. And Indonesia, 218 deaths. A new country, Indonesia and Peru, have entered in terms of top 10 countries contributing in terms of deaths. So these deaths, if you see the spatial spread, they are in Americas, they are in Europe, and they are in Asia. So they are spread all across the world, except you don't find any country of Africa, which is again a scary scenario, because if it is not caught up there, it only means it is waiting to have a wave in the backyard. So one should not lower the guard. Next slide, please. This is a snapshot for India. 2,57,298 cases in the last 24 hours, 4,194 deaths, and 20.66 lakh tests yesterday. And 7-day average test positivity rate has been 14.4%, 29.2 lakh active cases, and shrinking by -3.2%. Total is 2.63 crore cases, and we are inching towards official figures of just about 4,500, less than 3 lakh deaths. Official figures, I must say, 2,95,560 lives have been lost officially in India. 19.34 crore vaccination doses have been given, and yesterday it was 14.6 lakhs doses of vaccination were given. Next slide, please. This is important. This is an important slide. How the things change, and change every day, change every week. If you look at the left column, confirmed cases, out of 2,57,000 cases, Tamil Nadu and Karnataka and Kerala at the top. If you recollect, Maharashtra used to be at the top. Now it is all three southern states. Tamil Nadu 36,000, Karnataka 32,000, Kerala 29,000, and Andhra Pradesh 20,000. And again, the top five. Top five. West Bengal has entered top five, 19,000. Odisha is a new entrant, 12,000 cases. Uttar Pradesh is a new entrant at the top 10, 7,600. Rajasthan, 5,225. Assam, 6,000. Haryana, 5,600. Punjab, 5,200. Bihar, 5,100. Chhattisgarh, 4,900. Madhya Pradesh, 4,300. Gujarat, 4,200. So what do you observe? New states have come in. New states which were not there at the top 10. So it is spreading actively all across the country. Deaths, if you look at the deaths, out of 4,194, still Maharashtra is the top, 1,263. But new entrant at the top 5 are Tamil Nadu, 467, Karnataka, 353. Uttar Pradesh is now reporting 172 deaths. Punjab reported 172 deaths. West Bengal reported 159 deaths. Kerala, 142 deaths. Rajasthan, 129 deaths. Uttarakhand, 116 deaths. Haryana, 112 deaths. Andhra Pradesh, 104 deaths. So all these states have reported more than 100 deaths a day. Official figures. Official figures attributing the deaths to COVID-19. But if you look at the number of cremations, one needs to validate this data. Now we come to tests per million per day. Are we testing enough? If you look at the Indian average is 1,526 tests per million per day. But if you look at Rajasthan, it's only testing 606 tests per million. Rajasthan, West Bengal is testing only 787. Madhya Pradesh is testing only 933 tests. Bihar is 1,000 tests. Manipur 1,000. Uttar Pradesh 1,200. Sikkim 1,300. Meghalaya 1,400. And Jharkhand 1,428. So remember, these are the most populous states of the country, especially if you look at Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, West Bengal, and Bihar. They are not testing enough. Now, if you look at the test positivity rate in terms of 7-day average, Indian average is 14.4, but look at Goa. Goa is reporting 34% test positivity. Sikkim, 33%, Karnataka, 30%, West Bengal, 28%, Kerala, 24%, Andhra Pradesh, 23.9%, Himachal, 22%, Meghalaya, 21%, Tamil Nadu, 20%, Nagaland, 19%, Odisha, 19%, Pondicherry, 19%, Manipur, 19%, Rajasthan, 19%, Chandigarh, 16%, Lakshadweep, 14%, Haryana, 13%, Uttarakhand, 13%, and Maharashtra 11%, and Mizoram 11%, and Ladakh 10%. So all these, look at the number, more than half the states are reporting more than 10% test positivity rate during the last 7 days. If you look at the daily growth, that is the orange column, 7-day average daily growth, Indian average is 1.09%, Meghalaya is Mizoram, Tamil Nadu, Sikkim, Pondicherry, Himachal, Odisha, Assam, West Bengal, Tripura, Nagaland, Jammu Kashmir, Karnataka, Manipur, all are reporting higher daily growth. Higher daily growth. More than half the states are reporting. If you look, go up to Haryana, it is more than 50% states are reporting 1.09%, more than 1.09% daily 7-day average daily growth rate. Now we come to the last column on the right, green one, vaccinated persons in with at least one dose. India is 10.83%, but look at the bottom, Uttar Pradesh and Bihar only 5%, Tamil Nadu 6.9%, Assam 8%, Jharkhand 8%, Nagaland 8.78%, West Bengal 9%. So these are the states, most populous states have not even vaccinated 10% of their population. Next slide, please. Has shown definite improvement. It is on the road to recovery. The daily positivity rate in Delhi has dropped to 4.8% on Friday. That is yesterday. The first time since April 4 that the figure has dropped below 5%. And if you look at the 7-day positivity rate, it has definitely come down. 3,009 new COVID-19 cases were in Delhi were there on Friday, the lowest in 50 days. Case rate also plummets. The 7-day average new cases now lowest is 4,500. Active cases are less than 35,000. Less than 64% fall in active cases in 23 days, from 99,000 on April 28 to 35,683 on Friday. Next slide, please. Current growth rate of active cases is minus 3.4%. If you look at the extreme right of the graph, this is from April last year to yesterday. It is now growth rate is falling, which is a good omen. Next slide. Next slide. This is a slide which shows you daily cases across states. They are falling everywhere, but not in Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, and Assam. Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, and Assam is still showing increasing cases. Others either have stabilized or are falling. Next, please. This is daily testing across states. So you will realize that testing, if you see, look, Gujarat has come down. If you look at Rajasthan, it has come down. If you look at Kerala, it has come down. If you look at Karnataka, it has come down. Maharashtra, it has come down. And Telangana, it is coming down, which is not a good sign. Testing should be increased. Uttarakhand, it should also come down. Next slide, please. Now, this is interesting. We compare the first and second wave, daily cases and daily deaths. If you look at the first wave at the bottom, which is blue, and the second wave in orange, this left side is daily cases across two waves. If you look at the first wave, it was gradual and gradual fall, gradual rise, gradual fall. But the second wave cases have risen with exponential growth, and the fall is equally sharp. Okay, now, but the same is not replicated in terms of deaths. On the right are the daily deaths across two waves. Bottom is the first wave, and the left side orange one is the second wave. It continues to increase. It is not showing a plateau, nor it's showing a fall. So that is an area which needs further investigation. Next, please. This is a graph which shows daily cases and daily cases which are 7-day average daily cases are moving down. If you, the gray line is daily cases, 7-day average moving average, which is on the gray, and the red one is daily sample tested, which should have continued to increase, but it has not. Next, please. Now, this is an important epidemiological graph. We want to compare what percentage of population is confirmed COVID positive and what proportion of is at least partially vaccinated so far in each state. Now, this is not to show a correlation, but we want to see which states we find in one corner and which states we find in the other corner. Now, states in the lower left at the bottom, they have a lot to catch up in terms of vaccinations or and detecting more cases. Which are these states? These states, if you see, They are Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Tamil Nadu. Bottom left, if you look at, bottom left are Tamil Nadu, Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. They need to catch up on vaccinations and also detecting new cases. Next slide, please. This is an important observation. Rural South is becoming new COVID-19 epicenter. Rural South. Even as number of COVID-19 cases has fallen in the past 2 weeks, the pandemic continues to spread at a faster clip in rural India, particularly in the south. Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, and Tamil Nadu account for most of the rural districts where infections have risen sharply in the past 2 weeks. Of the 30 rural districts that have seen at least 1,000 new cases every week in the last 2 weeks, Karnataka has 10, Tamil Nadu has 7, and Andhra Pradesh has 5. Among the 30 districts, Anantapur in Andhra, Bellary in Karnataka added over 5,000 cases over the past week. Erode in Tamil Nadu saw close to 4,000 cases over the same period. Amravati, the only district for Maharashtra in the list, saw its weekly cases rise by 1,027 and 18.4% growth. Of the 26 rural districts in Maharashtra, only 6 saw cases go up. In contrast, in Andhra Pradesh, 7 of the 8 rural districts saw a rise, which is led by Anantapur district. Drawing from multi-tiered 2011 census definition of urban units, we have considered the district with a population density of below 400 persons per square kilometer as rural, and rural districts typically have weak health infrastructure and low testing capacity, which means many cases go unreported. Nonetheless, infection numbers provide a rough sense of the emerging hotspots. The 30 worst hit rural districts together account for 4% of India's total population, but they account for 12% of the country's current caseload. 2 weeks ago, they accounted for only 5% of the total cases. Next slide, please. This is what is shown. I was just talking to you on this. If you see at the top, Anantapur, Bellary, Karnataka, Erode, Tamil Nadu, YSR, Andhra Pradesh, Visakhapatnam, Andhra Pradesh, Shimoga, Karnataka, Uttara Kannada, Karnataka, Damagere in Karnataka, Gadag in Karnataka, and Thoothukudi in Tamil Nadu. These are the top districts which have shown growth in new weekly cases from 12th May to 19th May. And the same is showing graphically on the India map, the district map, where new confirmed cases in each district in the last 7 days, which the darkest is more than 5,000. If you look at, most of the districts are in South India. So it is only shifting from one place to the other. Next slide. This is another worrying issue, the rising deaths. Tamil Nadu's COVID deaths, there is a surge in Tamil Nadu's COVID deaths. Uttar Pradesh and Karnataka are seeing a drop. Even as new infections decline in some of the early hotspots, such as Maharashtra and Delhi, the death toll continued to rise, partly because of delayed reporting. Maharashtra and Karnataka reported the most deaths over the past week at 5,514 and for 2,594 respectively, and Karnataka's number dropped by 17.8% over the week. Uttarakhand and Tamil Nadu reported the highest percentage growth in COVID deaths over the past week. Uttarakhand reported 1,080 deaths this week, up 30% from the last week. Tamil Nadu reported 1,966 deaths this week, almost double that was reported a fortnight ago, led by Chennai, Kanchipuram, Vellore, Tiruvallur, and Kanyakumari. Concerns around underreporting of deaths, especially in rural India, continue to grow as ground reports showed crematoriums and burial grounds struggling to accommodate the dead. Next slide, please. On the other hand, another worrying trend, big drop in vaccination. India's vaccination pace has dropped to 1.39 million daily doses over the past week, 33% lower than the previous week, as supply constraint forced several states to limit their vaccination programs. The current pace is the slowest weekly pace since the second week of March. Among major states, Himachal Pradesh continues to lead in vaccines per capita with 300 doses administered per 1,000 people. Delhi, with 260 doses per 1,000 people, has crossed Kerala, which is 239, to take the second place. In the past week, West Bengal, Punjab, and Telangana remained at the bottom of the list. While West Bengal and Punjab each administered 2 additional doses for every 1,000 people, Telangana gave only 1 dose per 1,000 persons. In stark contrast, Delhi and Uttarakhand have given 27 and 13 additional doses respectively. These numbers are, however, lower than the previous week when these two states gave 36 and 29 extra shots for every 100 people. On the left, you see a graph, India map, which shows Uttar Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, and Bihar. They are lagging behind in COVID-19 vaccination. Color is according to the vaccines doses given per 1,000 population, with dark red with more than 301 and gray which less than 124, dark gray less than 124. Ladakh you are seeing 438, while on the other hand Gujarat is showing 233, Maharashtra 163, Tamil Nadu only 91, Tripura 356. Next slide, please. This shows the percentage of eligible population that has received at least one dose of vaccination. Lowest is in Uttar Pradesh, 8%, Tamil Nadu, 9%. The top two states in the red. While highest at the bottom are Chhattisgarh with 26% and Himachal Pradesh with 34% at the bottom with blue color. Himachal and Chhattisgarh. If you see red are Uttar Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Bihar, Assam, Jharkhand, West Bengal, Andhra Pradesh, and Madhya Pradesh, which is above the India average. Next slide, please. This is again an important slide where we show gender gap in terms of vaccination. So at the top, you see Himachal, where females are covered more than males, and Jammu Kashmir, see the difference between male and female. That means females are not receiving vaccination. Again, Delhi, the gap is substantial, as if females are not receiving vaccination, only males are receiving. Same thing in Odisha, same thing in Punjab. What is happening to women in these four states? Are they not coming forward, or are they not being brought for vaccination, or they are not there? It is incomprehensible. If women are there, each of the states you find males are vaccinated more, except in Uttarakhand, except in Kerala, and except in Karnataka, where females are vaccinated more than males. Next, please. This is how different regions are faring in vaccination. Until May 19, India had administered at least 186 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines in all, according to COVID dashboard. At least 145 million of these were first doses and 41 million were second doses. Put otherwise, India has fully vaccinated 41 million people and has given at least one dose to 145 million more. According to population projections made for March 21 by the National Commission on Population, this translates to a total around 14 doses per 100 population, with 10.7% of the population having received at least the first dose and 3% having received both the doses. These headline numbers, however, hide a wide variation across different regions. Next slide, please. 70% of districts have received less than 20 doses per 100 population. This is the real India. In the larger numbers, we hide huge disparities in our country. Official estimates of district level population are not available. However, even the 2011 census data can offer insights into the variation in vaccination coverage across the district. This shows that 70% or 448 of the 639 districts in the census have received only up to 20 doses per 100 population. Almost 2/3 of the 187 districts where the coverage is only up to 10 doses per 100 population are in UP, Bihar, and Tamil Nadu. And not just because of the large number of districts in these states. Over 80% of districts in these three states have administered only up to 10 doses per 100 population. To be sure, there are also 12 districts where their coverage is over 40 doses per 100 population, and they are in India. 3 of them, the Central and New Delhi Census District of Delhi and Gurgaon, are however in the National Capital Region, where people traveling from neighboring areas to get a jab might have inflated the coverage data. So if you look at the data on the right, the graph of India, 4 to 10 is red. These are almost uniformly in northwestern India and southern India in Tamil Nadu. You do not see any red in either in Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, or Gujarat, or Rajasthan even. Next slide, please. Universal coverage does not always translate into vulnerable population coverage. This is shown in this graph. Population projections for 2021 at the state level confirm the findings of the district level data. Himachal Pradesh, Kerala, Uttarakhand, and Delhi have administered the highest doses per capita, and UP, Bihar, and Tamil Nadu have administered the least. But a breakup by age suggests not all states with the highest universal coverage have covered the highest share of their older population. For example, the top 10 states, northeastern states, except Assam, merged as one. They share of population covered by at least one dose, as split by age is available from COVID dashboard for this. Among the 22 states for which we have population projections are Himachal Pradesh, Kerala, Delhi, Uttarakhand, Chhattisgarh, Gujarat, Rajasthan, the 7 northeastern states, and Haryana, Himachal, which is about 2 percentage points ahead of the Kerala, has done well in covering its 45 plus population. Imagine Himachal, which is a hilly state, has covered a huge number of over 45 population. If you look at the graph, on the right top, on the center top is Himachal, the highest coverage by any yardstick. The difference in the coverage of plus population is much bigger. In Kerala, for instance, has covered only 46% of its 45 plus population, and Chhattisgarh 66%. This is because Chhattisgarh has a smaller 45 plus population, 23.6% of total population, and Kerala the highest, 36% of 45 plus population. Rajasthan and Uttarakhand are similarly ahead in inoculating a higher share of their older population among states with similar levels of universal coverage because of a younger population. But Delhi, Uttarakhand, the northeastern states, and Haryana are not. They are, however, ahead of their peers in vaccinating their younger population, despite having the highest, fourth highest, second highest, and sixth highest share of 18 to 44 population, respectively, among the 22 states. Interesting findings. How much disparity is there at every level, not only in cases, not only in deaths, but also in vaccination. Some people get preferentially, some people do not get, and they still keep on waiting. Next slide, please. This is a bitter truth of India, and that can come out through only epidemiological studies. Reduced supply may have halted progress in vaccination. If you look at it, the blue one is 18 to 44, and 45 plus is in the red. Vaccine supply might have played a role in these age-specific trends in inoculation. It was only on April 1st that vaccination was opened completely for 45 to 60 age group, and India's vaccination speed reduced 2 weeks after that. This could have prevented states from vaccinating the freshly eligible older population. 74% of the 45 plus age group vaccinated until May 19 had been vaccinated by April 15. Even in the 18 to 44 age group, 45% of those vaccinated so far had been vaccinated by April 15. Younger healthcare and frontline workers were among the first to get vaccinated. Although general vaccination for this age group was opened up only on May 1. So that is the truth, the bitter truth of India's equity and universal coverage in terms of vaccination for COVID-19. Next slide, please. Another important area which has come out in the last week is the epidemic notifiable disease, mucormycosis. In Delhi itself, there were 200 black fungus cases. 2,750 vials of amphotericin B 50 milligram have been allocated by the center to Delhi till May 31st. 2,150 available vials of amphotericin B, which can treat only 24 patients. 2,150 vials can cover only 24 patients with black fungus. 600 vials allocated to Delhi on Wednesday. However, these had not arrived till Thursday evening. Now, we should know about mucormycosis, that one should know how much of the antifungal drug does a patient need. You would be shocked to know that the treatment protocol is for 15 days and a 300 milligram dose is usually recommended for 1 day. So a patient needs approximately 90 vials of amphotericin B of 50 milligram each over the course of their treatment. So for one patient, you require 90 vials. There are 200 active cases of black fungus in Delhi and 18,000 vials of amphotericin B. Delhi needs only to treat existing patients. 15,000 vials of antifungal medicine Delhi will need in a week, according to a projection by the state government. This is the truth. The demand supply gap is huge. Next slide, please. If you look at the states with most cases, Maharashtra 1500 cases, 90 deaths, Gujarat 1163 cases, 61 deaths, Madhya Pradesh 575 cases, 31 deaths of mucormycosis, Haryana 268 cases, 8 deaths, Delhi 203 cases, 1 death, UP 169 cases, 8 deaths, Bihar 103 cases, 2 deaths, Chhattisgarh 101 cases and 1 death, Karnataka 97 cases and no deaths, and Telangana 90 cases and 10 deaths. These are official figures given to the Supreme Court of India in an affidavit by the central government. So these are cases which are on record in the system. 7,251 are the confirmed cases are reported across India according to the central government. At least 219 deaths associated with the disease in India according to the data which is available officially. The question mark is then, why are cases appearing now? Possibility is the spike at present appears to be a fallout of incorrect COVID-19 treatment, or it could be overuse of some steroids with high prevalence of diabetes making it worse. There's a possibility. We do not know the truth. Only an in-depth epidemiological study will show what is the truth behind the genesis or the epidemic of mucormycosis. 54% fatality rate of mucormycosis, according to America's CDC. 54% fatality rate, according to CDC. Next slide. This is important, and I will conclude with this slide. The principal scientific advisor had brought in a new guideline where combination of the genesis due to aerosol, droplets, and surfaces has been highlighted. For the first time, Government of India has projected aerosol as a means of transmission. On the left top, if you see, it can be carried in the air up to 10 meters. It can be carried up to 10 meters. The risk is significantly high if someone is without a mask. Second, as droplets, which we already knew, someone speaking or coughing can spew larger droplets that fall within 2 meters. Third, via surfaces, though rare and not established beyond doubt, it can potentially spread from surfaces contaminated via viral droplets. So these three, most important at the top is an aerosol up to 10 meters. This is a new acceptance by Government of India. And accordingly, the guidelines, the new latest guideline spread out to 2 days back, are important for each one of us to understand if we are to effectively work as occupational health physicians in our practice. So number one, ventilate all shared spaces. Ventilate all shared spaces at home and at office. How it can be done at home? By keeping door and windows open as much as possible for open flow of air. Number one. Number two, let outdoor air flow in to displace the indoor air. Number three, use an exhaust system or a fan placed near a window to increase air exchange. Number four, keep exhaust fans running if windows and doors are shut. So these 4 interventions at home shall reduce your vulnerability to COVID-19. At office, again, there are 3 interventions required. Windows and doors must be kept ajar if the workplace has multiple air conditioning units. Number 2, this also applies for offices with centralized air conditioning, which should be having HEPA filters. Number 3, in both kinds of spaces, unidirectional fans can expel air, helping draw in outside air from doors. So keep doors open. Second, rigorous mask discipline. Please remember, rigorous mask discipline is to be done in a manner that N95 masks without respirator offer maximum protection, number 1. Number 2, people should ensure masks fit snugly and cloth masks are washed every day. Cloth masks need to be washed every day, please remember. Otherwise, the risk of fungal infection remains. Third, they should wear a mask when outside or at home with outsiders. Two conditions: they should wear mask when outside or at home with outsiders. And what makes it harder to stop? Asymptomatic, pre-symptomatic threat. People can be contagious without showing any symptoms. Unventilated spaces in closed areas such as homes and offices with no cross ventilation, virus particles can keep accumulating in the air. So widespread testing and isolation is the only solution. Rapid antigen tests can help improve surveillance in rural and semi-urban areas. ASHA, Anganwadi, and healthcare workers can be trained to carry out these tests. These workers should be given oximeters to better monitor mild and asymptomatic cases. So this is the latest Government of India guidelines, which is a substantive shift from the guidelines which were issued by Government of India in the past. So one needs to be updating as the scientific knowledge updates, and we should continue our guard, our intention to learn the latest. Thank you so much for patiently listening.
Thank you, Dr. Rajiv, sir. Yes, there is a substantial shift in the government guidelines and our thinking also regarding dealing with the pandemic. We are now more focused on vaccination, double masking, and as you rightly said, ventilation is very important, and we have to be very careful if we go outdoors, because aerosols, they can now infect or reinfect a person if he is not careful. So, Dr. Rajgopal sir, you have any other question from Dr. Rajiv Jain sir?
Yeah. See, Rajiv, your presentation has been brilliant and erudite as usual. It is not easy to compile all this from various sources and present it so coherently. And to me, this is a very good way of knowing what is happening in our country at a snapshot. My question, Rajiv, to you is, looking at all these epidemiological parameters, first wave, second wave, variants of concern, variants which hit us, so many other things. Do you really see light at the end of the tunnel? And if so, what do we need to do as a country?
Very interesting question, actually. As I said in the beginning, and I've been continuously saying, it's evolution of this pandemic is going in a very dynamic fashion. It is changing every day. The way, if you've seen the mutant last week, I showed how the mutants, how the variants are evolving. In fact, today, the latest Public Health England has come out how effective the vaccination, AstraZeneca vaccine, has been for the latest mutant, which is A16172. And the results are very encouraging. So we should continue to learn and apply to our practice in India. But the real challenge I feel now in India will be, as Dr. Pingle has been saying, India is a country within a continent. So though it's a country, but actually it behaves like a continent. If you compare Europe with India, we have such diverse population and geography. It definitely require that we need to have district and sub-district level strategies tuned to a very good network of information and application of that information back in that population from where the information is generated. So I think that would sum up. Unless we know how deeply the things are happening, the interventions, the science and intervention strategy, and this is the bigger challenge.
So
I got a question,
give a
Dr.
date
Rajiv.
when it is going to be over? Sorry, just one question to Rajiv. Any
I
crystal
think
gazing?
your guess and my guess would be similar, or anybody else's guess would be similar. Absolutely difficult to even predict where it is going to spread. Though you can predict the cyclone where it will go, but it is more difficult to where this virus is going to go, whether northwest or northeast or south. Even 15 days back, one could not predict how deeply it will strike the South India. And now you find all the states of South India are in the grip. And I could not predict 15 days back there will be so many number of deaths in South India. So this is our I would say the best of astrologists are going to fail, and the best of scientists will fail the way things are actually rolling out. And I think this gives a big diet to epidemiologists for the last now 3 months. Every day is a new learning. And epidemiologists are learning not only in India, they are learning outside India, from India, the data which is being generated.
Thank you.
Is it over, Dr. Rajgopal?
Yeah, thank you. With
Can I take my
Rajiv,
question?
nothing is over, but for the moment it is over. Thank you.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Well said.
Dr. Rajiv, first of all, my compliments for a wonderful presentation and a very detailed presentation. I have two questions to ask. My first question is, see, some of, or rather very few North Indian states, they are not reporting deaths as COVID deaths. Neither they are testing. Even in one case, I have been told by one of the CMO of a district that the guidelines are, if a patient is admitted into a COVID ward and just a day before his death or her death, the COVID report comes negative, that death will not be counted against COVID. I think that seems to be very, very unfair as far as the data generation is concerned. And number two, you must be, all of us must be watching television, and there are innumerable number of dead bodies floating in the river or in the river bank. They have been buried. Shallow burying is there. But in spite of that, the number of deaths in these states is very, very few. And my question is, since everybody in this country, almost 99% of the population have their own Aadhaar card with them. So can we link this with the Aadhaar card so that you can immediately come out what is the total number of deaths? Because these deaths have never been counted, though they are in thousands, let me tell you. So, or else can you come out with any other system where we can correctly calculate, count these deaths? Leave aside the numbers. This is one. Would you like to answer it, or shall I put the second? Because second is with black fungus.
Yes, this is a fact, and this is well known. In fact, our reporting system of deaths in normal times, pre-COVID times, was hugely deficient. The way the deaths are reported, if you see the disparity of reported deaths in proportion of actual deaths to reported deaths, is substantially higher in Maharashtra and Gujarat, just because of the normal system of reporting of deaths. The same is not true of Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Jharkhand, and Madhya Pradesh, even in normal times. So over that, if you overlay the lack of infrastructure and the places where the deaths are occurring, the gap between the reported deaths and actual deaths is huge, because even deaths getting reported in the system is substantially less than the actual deaths. Over that, you add on not knowing the cause of death, because nobody has tested, nobody has even officially cremated the body. They've just either put the body in the river or put at the banks of the river, which are not officially declared cremation places or cremation grounds. So that is a reality. And in fact, this is not only in India, all over the world. The World Health Statistics report has been released 2 days back. The first observation is substantial underreporting of deaths across the world. And what they're saying, 4 times the number of reported deaths, 4 to 5 times.
Huge.
Number, that is the number one observation which has come, the key observation in the World Health Statistics report, which has been released 2 days back. I shall be discussing that in the next webinar on next Friday, which we have our webinar where we discuss occupational and environmental issues. I will highlight this aspect in little bit more detail, but suffice to say, in India and across the world, South America is the similar situation. I know how Southern America reports the deaths. In Brazil, in Ecuador, in Bolivia, in all these countries, there are definite gaps in reporting of deaths in normal times. So they get accentuated during COVID times.
Okay. And my now second question is, see, what is this 300 milligram of amphotericin B we give in black fungus? So is it given as a single shot or it is given as a divided?
Come again, please.
In this mucormycosis,
Yes.
the amphotericin B injection is given as 300 milligram per day. So this 300 milligram per day is a single dose or is it as a divided dose? And if it is a single dose,
Single
then,
dose.
single
For 15 days.
then what is the logic of manufacturing this injection with 50 milligrams only? Why can't we manufacture a 300 milligram vial?
No, it's given
So,
daily. It is given daily.
I agree with what you're saying, but if you see, amphotericin B is not only used in mucormycosis.
Okay.
Normal times, amphotericin B has other uses also.
Okay.
That is the reason.
But if it is given as a single dose, I think it should also be available in 300 milligram vial.
Yes, that can be true. In countries, other countries, it is available as 300 milligram as well. 100
Because
milligram.
then logistic problem will be solved, na? Now you are using 90 vial for single patient.
In fact, if you see, the government of India has given license to 6 other companies, and we are importing a huge number in the next 15 days from abroad to match up the demand.
Thank you.
So, any other question from the panelists, sir? They can unmute themselves and they can interact and ask question. Yes, Dr. Tyagaraja, sir.
Good evening, sir. I have a etiology for this mucormycosis. In rheumatoid arthritis, we give lot of steroids. Most of the elder people, like diabetes people, also they take this kind of this one. But now etiology is most confusing because we had a shortage of oxygen. This usually the medical oxygen is usually it is an FDA approved, and now we have seen a lot of industrial oxygen has been converted into medical oxygen and it has been given. So many people, learned people, come out with conclusion that maybe it is one of the cause for this mucormycosis of the black fungus. And recently we have come across white fungus also. Dear Dr. Rajiv Jain ji, will you please throw some light on this?
Well, interesting. I do not know is the best answer, because this has to be studied in depth. What were the causes? People are saying industrial oxygen versus medical oxygen. Some people are still saying the unwashed mask used. There could be any reason. One cannot explain it substantially or substantively unless the matter is studied in depth. The epidemiology of mucormycosis epidemic in the recent past need to be studied scientifically to understand what are the factors leading to this severe increase in such a short time, and how and what were the contribution of different factors which led to this epidemic. I think the next months we will know more.
Thank you very much, sir.
So, to add to this, like I am from oil and gas industry, and we have been supplying industrial oxygen to various Indian states. So, what we have gathered information like many of the LPG bullets and other carriers, they had been converted to carry the oxygen in because of this emergency situation. So maybe because medical oxygen it is transported in a very hygienic way, and right now we have converted all sort of transport mediums into to carry this industrial oxygen. So because Dr. Tyagaraja is right, because of this sudden surge in mucormycosis cases, so doubt comes in the mind of the people also that steroids was being used earlier also and it was in the same doses which is being used right now and comorbidities like diabetes and other things were also there. But right now, maybe this industrial oxygen might have contributed to this sudden rise in mucormycosis. That can be, but as rightly said by Dr. Rajiv, it should be studied properly before we come to a conclusion.
Actually, there's not much of a difference if you look at it between industrial and other oxygen, except in the way and the cylinders in which they are actually packed, more than anything else, even in terms of impurity. But the theory which is going around actually is that the oxygen, you use some water also while you push in oxygen, either to the nasal cannula or whatever. You need to use sterile water rather than only the distilled water. And in many places, they have found a link between non-sterile water and the other one. So that is the theory. In terms of steroid usage, Sandeep, right now people are using it in an indiscriminate fashion. We have seen people using it on the day 1 and day 2 as something which is great. And then people don't monitor their sugar levels. You have got cases of diabetes happening after somebody has got COVID, not even pre-COVID. So COVID also affects the pancreas, the insulin and everything. So this is a complex mix of things. And there's a huge shortage now of amphotericin and other higher antifungals. One theory was to use posaconazole as a preventive, but that has not gathered ground. In fact, posaconazole is now used where amphotericin is still under a problem. So there are issues, and we have become the diabetic and the mucormycosis capital of the world now. It's very sad now. Right. If COVID doesn't get you, mucormycosis will. That's the sort of a thing which is happening now.
And the prolonged stay of the patients in the hospital, that is also contributing in this.
Yes. Earlier on, in the last one, if you look at the first wave, as it was called, if somebody had crossed 7-8 days, you could say safely, you are safe now, don't worry. Now we can't say that. Yes. Fever begins suddenly on day 9. People are okay. They suddenly have a drop in saturation on day 9, day 10. And before you know it, your CORAD scores and everything go haywire, your lungs are affected, and you are really, really in serious trouble. So you may not have the actual cytokine storms which we're seeing in the first surge, but this time the variant is behaving in a totally different manner. People die of complications like pulmonary embolism or indeed variations in heart rhythms, etc. So this is affecting the heart and the lungs. No question about it.
That's right. So any other question from the panelists? They can unmute themselves or they can raise hand as we can conclude.
I can't see Shiva.
Dr. Shiva is there.
He's there, but he's hiding. Hey, Shiva.
Yeah, he is there.
Shiva, unmute kar yaar.
I'm not hiding.
Sorry?
I'm not hiding.
You're not hiding? Okay. So where is your best joke for the day?
So anyway, Rajiv, you are always excellent.
Yeah.
I don't miss your every Friday, Saturday meet. I make it a point to come and hear.
Yes.
Because the information available is fantastic.
Shiva used to visit Hanuman Mandir on Saturdays. Now he stopped going there. He comes for these.
So thank you very much, Rajiv.
Welcome. Dr. Sandeep, there are questions in the chat question box as well. Dr. Vani has asked, series has come up with recommendation a few days back that co-administration COVID-19 vaccine can be given with any vaccine simultaneously. What's your take on this? And should MOHW also amend their recommendation? Well, this issue is under examination at the present juncture with NACVEC, and they may, in due course of time, may disclose. This has been discussed, and you will find new recommendations and acceptance by Government of India in due course of time. Another question by Dr. Rajendra Rendalkar has been, the pandemic is defying epidemiological principles. Could I ask a question? Yes, go ahead, Dr. Rajendra Rendalkar. If you want, he's in the guests, I believe. Rajendra Rendalkar, and in the attendees. Yes, he is come now. You can unmute and ask your question.
Yeah. So my question is on a broader aspect. Presently, if you see from the epidemiologists world over, they mentioned that the second wave or the mutant wave is always offer a lesser intensity, whereas the opposite is happening this time. So do you think that if first question is whether this is a natural virus or it's an artificially manufactured one, where because most epidemiologists have mentioned that artificially manufactured viruses could mutate to a higher degree. If that is the case, then should we expect a third wave to be of a more drastic nature?
Well, interesting question, but the current evidence, epidemiological evidence the world over, different laboratories, including the Western world, whether in US or Europe, does not support the theory that it is artificially manufactured, number one. Number two, the evolution of viruses is normal. This evolution of virus, the coronavirus, is normal. This kind of changes that occur, they normally occur in these kind of viruses in normal times. If you see SARS virus, the same thing was occurring. And that's the major challenge for vaccines. Dr. Thakkar presented you the vaccine science of influenza. If you recollect, none of the Western countries manufacturers have ever evolved a vaccine for influenza which is useful for even 2 seasons. It can be only relevant for 1 season. Why? Because the virus changes its structure. It's a very smart virus. Influenza virus is a bit less smart, but the SARS-CoV-2 virus is definitely more smart. It changes faster. It senses its environment. It senses its challenges to its survival and growth and transmissibility, and evolves faster than human science can evolve. So we will keep catching up, but definitely the virus will keep on evolving as other viruses of this group of viruses, that is coronaviruses, also evolve with the same pace. There's nothing alarming about it. Only challenge is that this pandemic is going concurrently, and evolution of the virus is also going concurrently. That is the most challenging task at present with the world scientists, because when you detect one virus coming from UK, and another day another changed virus comes through South Africa, some other virus comes to Brazil, some other virus comes from India, so much so that people started talking about country and the change of virus, which is unscientific. It's just a number. So you cannot label a variant virus as Indian variant. It is unscientific to talk about a variant as an Indian variant. It is not. It cannot be, because India never generated a variant, or South Africa never generated a particular variant. Like somebody was talking Singapore variant. It cannot happen like that. It doesn't work that way in molecular epidemiology of viruses, especially coronaviruses.
Dr. Rajiv.
That was a very pertinent point, sir, you raised. Thank you very much, because pandemic was not mentioned. Nowhere was it mentioned a Wuhan or a Chinese pandemic, but the variant has been mentioned as an Indian variant. That's quite surprising. But you gave a very good explanation. Thank you.
In scientific journals, none of the text you will find Indian variant.
Yes, sir. They mentioned the number. Correct.
And if you see B1617 and then 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, already 4 of the subtypes of 617 are there, and we keep on.
Dr. Rajiv.
That's why if you heard, Indian government established acute or a tremendous expansion of laboratories tracking the gene sequencing of the viruses in India. Because this is to controlling the pandemic in India.
Dr. Rajiv.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
If that is the case, so do you feel that we will go for COVID vaccination every year?
The things are that a serious effort on the part of the government and vaccine manufacturers to tweak the structure of the vaccine in due course of time. You will find you may need a booster, or you may need 2 boosters, or you may need a revaccination with entirely modified vaccine, maybe next year.
Okay, quite right. Quite right.
So
Dr. Sandeep, if there are no questions, then we can.
we can conclude. So it's almost 2 hours now. So thank you, Dr. Rajiv Kumar Jain, sir, and thanks to all the participants and for sharing their valuable time for this COVID rapid updates and this particular webinar, which was the 52nd webinar. It's the participants who make this program a success, and this is an interactive program sharing knowledge and learning from each other. So I would request everyone to contribute, and they can suggest some good speakers which whom we can contact, and we can or some new topics can be.
Sandeep, we should remind about next week is the last Friday of the month. So next week, 6:30 p.m. Friday, we shall have OcuHealth updates.
Health updates will be there next Friday. So that is our monthly program. So thank you all very much for sharing your valuable time, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you. Doctor.
Thank you all. Thank you, sir.
you.